The husband became visibly irritated simply because his wife laughed a little too loudly while joking with the children during dinner with the family. The entire atmosphere suddenly fell into dead silence. At that moment, the maid walked in carrying a bowl of soup. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but the brief seductive glance exchanged between the two was instantly noticed by the wife sitting across from them. At the same time, the maid deliberately brushed against his hand. That single gesture immediately made the suspicious wife realize something was wrong. So after ending dinner early, Rika searched through her husband's coat pocket for clues. To her shock, she actually found a note filled with passionate words and the location of a secret meeting. Later that night, while the house was wrapped in silence, she quietly walked toward the shed in the yard. As expected, she discovered that her husband had betrayed her, but the wife chose to remain silent. Early the next morning, Rika left home with her young child. Although the scenery along the way was beautiful, it could not hide the pain reflected in her eyes. After an exhausting journey that lasted the entire day, the woman finally returned to her hometown and told her parents about her miserable marriage. But instead of comforting her, her mother believed it was her daughter's own failure that caused the marriage to collapse.
Mam, alsjeblieft. Ik heb onderdak nodig.
Je kunt hier niet blijven. En ook niks lenen.
Her father kept himself busy nearby, just like his wife, unwilling to offer his daughter any help at all. Even her younger brother could no longer tolerate such cold-hearted treatment toward their own family member and tried to plead with their mother, but the older woman mercilessly refused him as well. Not only did Rika fail to feel any warmth from her family, she was treated more like a complete stranger, so she decided to leave again with her child. But just as she stepped out of the store, her younger brother called out to stop her. Perhaps unable to bear seeing his sister treated so cruelly, he promised to help Rika find a place to stay temporarily. The scene then shifts to an 18-year-old young man from Suriname arriving in the Netherlands by cruise ship to seek out his cousin. His cousin was doing fairly well in the country and worked for Royal Dutch Airlines. Not only did he own a military motorcycle, he had also married a white woman, but his cousin's wife clearly did not seem very welcoming toward the boy. It turned out that Waldemar had come here to study and hoped he could temporarily stay at his cousin's home. But when his cousin's wife asked how long he planned to stay, the young man looked completely lost. That afternoon, he went to the business university to begin the application process for studying abroad. But even with a recommendation letter from Suriname, it was still far from enough, and he would have to complete new entrance courses first. For someone like him, success was considered almost impossible, yet Waldemar still decided to give it a try. On his first day of class, the young black student looked like a complete outsider. The white classmates all kept their distance, leaving Waldemar isolated by himself. Perhaps only through relentless hard work could he break through such prejudice. At the same time, he faced the exact same treatment on the bus. Even young children, too innocent to understand, repeated cruel and insulting words without hesitation. Waldemar could deeply feel the coldness of this country. Fortunately, he still maintained a positive spirit. He even put on a stylish swimsuit and jumped into the rough crashing sea, enjoying a carefree happiness like a child set free. However, once night fell, everything completely changed. He overheard his cousin and his cousin's wife arguing, simply because he was staying in their home. It was obvious that Waldemar could no longer continue living there. Meanwhile, after finding a new place to live, Rika brought all of her children over with the help of her younger brother. A new life and a fresh beginning quickly helped the family adapt to their new surroundings. But while the oldest son was playing with his younger brother on the street, he accidentally kicked the ball into the neighbor's yard. Just as the mother was about to retrieve it for her son, the neighbor woman reacted with shocking hostility and stabbed the ball with a knife. While Rika was still stunned by what happened, the woman arrogantly declared that this was her garden, her private property, and outsiders were not allowed to damage it. It was obvious that she looked down on the newly arrived Rika. In response, the woman dumped all the trash from the nearby bin, along with the punctured ball, directly into the neighbor's garden. Since everything inside was supposedly her property, she could keep all of it. At the same time, Waldemar arrived in the area while searching for a place to stay. After hearing that a house here was available for rent, he followed the address and came to this location, but to his surprise, the house had already been rented by Rika. Perhaps the information had not spread yet, so Waldemar had no choice but to look elsewhere. However, just as the boy was about to leave, he suddenly stopped and asked whether there was an extra room available, and from that very moment, the two of them began a connection that crossed not only age, but race as well. The woman was incredibly kind. After taking the children to school, She even brought breakfast to Waldemar while he buried himself in his studies, and she invited him to eat outdoors together with the family. Although their skin colors and cultures were different, Waldemar used his unique sense of humor to slowly win over the hearts of the children. As time passed, he completely became part of the family, watching the children laughing and playing freely in the rain. Rika finally revealed a smile she had not shown in a very long time. At the same time, Waldemar excitedly invited her to join them, and the woman gladly accepted. Perhaps this was the happiest moment Rika had experienced since leaving her former husband. But soon, everything began to change dramatically. When the landlord heard that a black man was living there, he immediately knocked on Rika's door and demanded that Waldemar be thrown out. Otherwise, all of them would have to leave. But the woman refused to back down and firmly stated that Waldemar was a legal tenant there, and since their rental period had not expired, nobody had the right to force them out. Not only that, conflicts also began appearing within the household itself. After learning that Waldemar loved eating rice, Rika replaced the family's main meals with rice dishes, but her oldest son strongly disliked the food and complained that rice was something animals should eat. The boy cried as he ran back into his room. He missed his father. When they left home, his father had been heartbroken, and now he wanted to return to see him during Christmas. Rika held her son tightly in her arms, but all she could offer were words of comfort. And just like that, Christmas finally arrived. That evening, Waldemar specially prepared a gift for Rika. Knowing how much she loved classical music, he bought her a record from a local shop. Taking advantage of the children already being asleep, the two quietly began dancing together inside the room. But as the distance between them grew closer and closer, the woman soon found herself deeply attracted by the charm radiating from him. Just as the two were about to move beyond that moment, Rika suddenly avoided the boy's gaze in time, and the atmosphere instantly became awkward. Waldemar had no choice but to leave first. But once someone falls into love, there is no easy way to escape it. The next day, Waldemar went to class as usual, but to his surprise, Rika appeared outside the school entrance. She was a woman devoted to her home and rarely went out alone. When Waldemar asked what was going on, Rika explained that she felt bored staying at home and simply wanted to get some fresh air. But it was obvious that she was hinting at something more. So the two of them went together to a movie theater, feeling the emotions flowing through the darkness like a young couple experiencing first love. Soon afterward, Waldemar gently touched the woman's hand. That brief moment of contact alone stirred emotions inside Rika that she could no longer suppress. As the pace of the film intensified, Waldemar directly held Rika's hand, and she did not resist, accepting it at exactly the right moment. Even though there was nearly a 20-year age difference between them, true love does not care about age or skin color. Afterward, they walked out of the theater into a sky filled with falling snowflakes. It was a symbol of romance, and also one of life's small moments of happiness. When Waldemar saw children playing with snowballs on the street, it awakened the childlike innocence still inside him. After all, in Suriname, he had never experienced such a pure white world before. He threw a snowball toward the children, but they did not respond kindly. Even the children carried deeply rooted prejudice, leaving Waldemar feeling disappointed and hurt. At that moment, unwilling to let anyone ruin the rare warmth between them, Rika scooped up snow from the ground and threw it toward the children herself. Waldemar seemed almost used to this kind of environment and continued enjoying every happy second of the moment. As their playful laughter and unchanging youthful spirits continued, the distance between them slowly disappeared. Waldemar embraced Rika from behind. As if this night was destined to become unforgettable, the two hurried back home together, and while the children were already lost in their dreams, the emotions they had been suppressing finally burst free in that moment. After some time, the two lay peacefully in bed together, sharing the thoughts hidden deep inside their hearts and officially confirming their relationship. But after being abandoned by her husband, Rika still had not legally ended the marriage, and no one knew whether this would become an obstacle between them. Unfortunately, the things people fear most always seem to arrive sooner or later. 2 months later, the woman began suffering from waves of nausea. For someone with experience, she immediately understood what it meant, so she quietly visited a clinic, hoping to end the pregnancy. But when the doctor asked Rika to lie down on the bed, a sudden moment of hesitation stopped her from going any further. That same night, Rika received a letter from her husband. In the letter, he clearly stated that he did not want a divorce, but Waldemar seemed completely unconcerned about it. And just like that, another 3 months passed. One day, while cleaning up together, Waldemar intentionally brushed against Rika's hand, yet this tiny movement was quietly noticed by her oldest son standing nearby. At the same time, While relaxing by the seaside with Waldemar, Rika finally stopped hiding the fact that she was already 4 months pregnant, but before Waldemar could even enjoy the happiness for a single second, she admitted that she had once wanted to get rid of the baby because she feared the judgment and stares of other people in the future. Waldemar felt deeply insulted. He even believed that Rika carried the same prejudice as other white people, and in anger, he left the place immediately. Afterward, he returned once again to his cousin's home, hoping to stay there for a few more days. As time slowly passed, Rika's belly became larger and larger. One day, while the two children were swimming in the water, her innocent daughter asked why their mother was not joining them, seemingly noticing her swollen figure as well. The simple comment that mommy is getting fat instantly caught the attention of the older son nearby. Being more mature than the others, the boy clearly realized something after noticing his mother's growing belly. After returning home, Vim and his younger brother smashed open the savings jar their mother had hidden away. As they picked up the coins scattered across the floor, he warned his brother not to tell anyone about it. Then, pretending they were going to attend the annual church event, the two secretly slipped into an alley and took off their coats. Meanwhile, Rika waited anxiously for her two sons, but they never showed up. Soon after, she returned home to search for them, yet the brothers were nowhere to be found. Panicked and overwhelmed with worry, the woman immediately rushed to the police station to report them missing, but while sitting on the bench waiting, she suddenly seemed to realize where the children might have gone, and as expected, the two brothers had indeed returned to their old home. The first thing they said after the door opened was that their mother was a traitor. Their father stood there completely stunned by those words. Meanwhile, the police also confirmed the children's location. Even though she knew her sons were safe, Rika still could not ease the heavy burden in her heart. That night, Rika went to Waldemar's cousin's house, hoping to apologize to him in person for the thoughts she once had. But by coincidence, Waldemar was away taking an important exam and was not home. After leaving behind the message that she wanted to see him, the woman quietly hurried away. But the very next day, everything suddenly took another dramatic turn. Her husband somehow discovered the address where Rika was living. The man had originally intended to reconcile with his wife, but the moment he realized Rika was pregnant, his expression completely changed. Only a few months had passed since she left home, yet his wife was already carrying another man's child. Furious, the man turned to leave, but suddenly stopped, as if guilt toward Rika still lingered deep inside him. So the two sat down inside the house and spoke honestly with each other. The husband explained that he had been offered a promising new job in a beautiful coastal city, and he begged his wife to go there with him. Besides, Rika had no income and no financial support now. Even for the sake of raising their 4 children properly, he hoped she could forgive him one more time. He even promised that the child in her womb would be treated as his own. But just as he was finally about to receive Rika's answer, Waldemar suddenly returned home. Willem was instantly left completely shocked, his eyes darting back and forth between the two of them. The moment he realized his wife was carrying a black man's baby, every thought of reconciliation that had just begun forming inside him disappeared in an instant. Clearly, this was something he could never accept. But since he and Rika were still legally married, Willem exploded in anger and threatened to destroy both of their lives. He even attempted to confront the woman on the spot. Unexpectedly, he was stopped by the man standing beside her. Although the marriage had already fallen apart, Willem made it clear that he would never let this go so easily. After Willem stormed away in rage, the two embraced each other tightly and promised they would never separate. However, early the next morning, Rika's younger brother suddenly came to visit. It was obvious that he had already learned about his sister's relationship with a black man, and he desperately tried to persuade Rika to end it immediately. Even if she did not care about herself, she should at least think about the future of her 4 children. But the woman had already made up her mind to stay with Waldemar, and no matter how hard others tried to convince her, nothing could change her decision. Seeing how stubborn she was, her brother immediately declared that he would never help her again from this point forward. He would not even pay another cent toward her rent anymore. But just after her brother left, Rika suddenly began showing signs of labor, and it was obvious the baby was about to be born. Meanwhile, the young children beside her had no idea what was happening to their mother. At the same time, after endless hard work and determination, Waldemar finally received his university acceptance letter. But the moment he heard he still needed to pay 300 Dutch guilders for tuition, the hope shining in his eyes instantly faded into disappointment because he simply could not afford it. Fortunately, the second he stepped through the front door, he heard the sound of a baby crying. The overwhelming joy immediately wiped away all the frustration he had just felt moments earlier. He excitedly rushed inside, where a healthy dark-skinned baby had just been born safely.
Als baby zijn ze nog schattig.
Waldemar paid no attention to the gossip and judgment of others. After all, today was supposed to be a joyful day, and he only wanted to thank Rika for everything she had sacrificed. But happiness never seemed to last long. The landlord soon came to find Rika. Because the rent had been overdue for several days, the man decided to end their lease immediately. Although the woman tried to gain his sympathy by pleading for the sake of the children, none of that mattered to the landlord. Life suddenly seemed to fall into complete hardship, leaving the woman overwhelmed and helpless. Yet while Rika was struggling with the pressure of their desperate situation, Waldemar suddenly walked into the room carrying 2 newly purchased balloons. The woman became furious. After all, they could not even afford the rent anymore, yet he still had the mood to waste money on unnecessary things. Faced with Rika's frustrated complaints, Waldemar said nothing at all. He simply lowered his eyes and glanced quietly at the camera hanging on his chest. The camera hanging from his chest was a gift from his mother, something more precious to him than anything else in the world. But faced with a family that could no longer survive financially, he had no choice but to pawn the treasured camera away. At the same time, Rika received a legal letter from her husband demanding custody of their children be taken away from her. Perhaps this was considered the best choice, because the family could no longer provide the children with a stable life. Early the next morning, Rika painfully said goodbye to her son and daughter. Filled with heartbreak and helplessness, she watched the children climb into the car and leave. Perhaps the hardest thing for any parent to let go of is their own flesh and blood. Inside a family that could never be repaired again, the children became the greatest victims, and also the guilt Rika could never escape from. Afterward, she and Waldemar packed up their belongings and moved out of the rented house. But things did not go as smoothly as they had hoped. Even after Waldemar exchanged his camera for a small amount of money, every white landlord in the city still refused to rent a home to a black man. That night, they had nowhere left to go and wandered the streets, as life finally pushed them into complete despair. Only people who have truly reached the end of the road can understand that feeling. Waldemar and Rika leaned against each other, forcing themselves to speak words of encouragement just to survive the freezing night together. Fortunately, fate had not abandoned them completely. An elderly Jewish man passing by noticed the couple's desperate situation. The moment he saw the baby wrapped in their arms, he kindly approached Waldemar and started speaking with them. The old man was gentle and warm-hearted. After learning that nobody was willing to shelter them, the Jewish man offered them a place to stay himself. It was a lively little theater filled with noise and music every night. The performers on stage radiated passion and energy, and the colorful atmosphere completely exceeded everything Rika had imagined, as if she had stepped into another vibrant world. Soon afterward, the owner led them to a small dormitory room. Although the space was tiny, it was more than enough to protect them from the cold and give them comfort. The next morning, Uncle Sam had already begun cleaning the theater early in the day. When Rika passed by and noticed the baby sleeping peacefully, she thoughtfully volunteered to help clean the theater herself. This simple kindness between strangers slowly helped Rika adapt to life there. Meanwhile, after realizing he could no longer afford the expensive tuition, Waldemar began searching everywhere for work. But unfortunately, because he was black, he struggled to find any opportunity to survive in a world controlled by white society. Although life moved forward with difficulty, he got along very well with the performers in the theater, and all the warmth and belonging they found there was thanks to the kind-hearted Uncle Sam. One morning, a black woman knocked on the door looking for her younger brother. Rika had heard before that Waldemar had a sister, but she had no idea how the woman managed to find this place. It turned out she had gotten the information from their cousin, but the moment Waldemar saw her, he immediately interrupted the conversation between the two women, as if there were things he desperately did not want Rika to know. So he quickly brought his sister into the main hall. The first thing she asked him was whether he truly intended to marry that woman. The moment she heard the woman was 37 years old and already had 4 children, the sister immediately looked completely shocked. Speaking in the name of the family, she firmly forbade Waldemar from continuing his relationship with Rika. But no matter what methods his sister used, Waldemar refused to abandon Rika, especially after she had selflessly given him a child of his own. Furious and completely disappointed, his sister immediately cut off all the financial support she had been providing him. Afterward, Waldemar returned to the room with a dark and exhausted expression. Even though he was already suffering enough inside, Rika still questioned his earlier behavior.
Dat we zo diep kunnen zinken.
Wat?
Dat jij de deur voor mij dichtsmijt alsof ik een stuk vuil ben. Schaam je je soms voor mij? Ja, zwijgen is ook een antwoord.
With nowhere else to turn, Waldemar could only seek help from his cousin once again. After using his personal connections, the cousin eventually managed to find Waldemar a job at a financial company. Even if he would have to endure humiliation from white coworkers, he still treasured this hard-earned opportunity more than anything, and just like that, 6 years passed in the blink of an eye. After endless struggle and perseverance, the couple finally began building a comfortable life. With financial support from Uncle Sam, they even opened a hotel of their own by the seaside and finally enjoyed the independent life they had never experienced before. But before they could officially welcome guests, a German soldier knocked on the door and informed them that the property had been requisitioned, although they would be compensated. Even though Rika felt deeply upset about it, faced with the overwhelming force of the German military occupation, the couple had no choice but to compromise. And just like that, their hotel officially became a shelter for German soldiers. Life gradually became better and better. Rika even began returning frequently to her hometown to visit the children she rarely had the chance to see. But her husband remained cold and unforgiving, still unable to let go of what happened years ago. Until one day, Rika suddenly received another letter from the lawyer, because she had repeatedly reunited with the children and violated their previous agreement to avoid contact. Her husband permanently cut off all communication between her and the children. Desperate and panicked, the woman rushed non-stop to the apartment where her husband lived, hoping to save even the smallest chance of seeing them again. But sadly, even while heavy rain poured outside, her husband still slammed the door shut without giving her even a moment to speak. Still refusing to give up, Rika ran to the window and screamed her daughter's name with all her strength, only for the curtain to be cruelly pulled shut by the woman who had once destroyed her marriage. Then she rushed to another window, hoping to see her 3 underage sons, but the boys acted as if they could not hear her. And once again, the curtains were shut tightly before her eyes. Rika cried out desperately into the dark rainy night, but every effort seemed completely useless. Meanwhile, after taking the child to watch a performance, Waldemar was riding the bus home when the little boy suddenly collapsed into his father's arms. Even though rainwater had soaked the child's tiny body, the boy remained motionless. At that moment, Rika happened to return home as well. The instant she touched the child's forehead, she realized he was burning with fever. The two immediately rushed him to a nearby hospital. After a thorough examination, the doctor discovered severe inflammation in both of the child's lungs, and all they could do now was wait for the treatment results. Rika stood there in complete shock as she stared at her weak son lying in the hospital bed. She even began believing that her relationship with Waldemar had brought punishment upon them from heaven. So the woman went to church and prayed with complete devotion, because it was the only thing left she could still do. Meanwhile, Waldemar suffered just as deeply while trying to work, standing there lost and empty-eyed with no idea what to do. At that moment, his supervisor approached him and explained that the doctor had called. The fear in his heart made every step forward feel unbearably heavy. When he saw a nurse dressed in white walking out of the hospital room, it suddenly awakened memories from his childhood. Back when his mother passed away in the hospital, a group of nuns had also walked by in the same way, giving him a terrible feeling he could not shake. When Waldemar finally entered the room and asked his wife about their son's condition, the child still remained unconscious and refused to wake up. Overwhelmed by grief and frustration, the man violently kicked at the equipment inside the hospital room. At only 20-something years old, he simply could not bear such devastating pain. But then something completely unexpected happened. The little boy lying on the hospital bed slowly opened his eyes, almost as if some miracle had awakened him, and softly whispered a single word: "Dad." The two parents froze in absolute shock. Death had not taken away the one thing holding their world together. Perhaps their prayers had finally been answered, because the broken love between them was tied together once again through this miracle. The very first thing Waldemar did after their child left the hospital was marry Rika. Perhaps her former husband had no other choice left, because he finally agreed to end the marriage officially. A full 6 years had passed, and Rika had waited far too long for this moment. She even wrote a letter to her daughter, telling Bertha everything she had experienced over the years, hoping to receive her blessing. And just like that, another 2 years passed. German soldiers were still stationed inside the hotel. But one day, a sudden knock at the door caused Rika to stop what she was doing. The moment she opened the door, she discovered that the children she had been separated from for 2 years had come to see her. Especially her third son, who once held deep resentment toward her, had now come willingly to visit his mother, making tears instantly fill Rika's eyes. So the mother prepared a rich dinner for her 3 children. The only regret was that the oldest son did not come, seemingly still unable to forgive what she had done years earlier. Even so, it could not ruin the family's joyful reunion. Another 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. As German forces gradually took full control of the Netherlands, the situation for Jewish people became increasingly dangerous. Even Uncle Sam, the man who had once helped them endlessly, no longer knew what his future would become. Rika's hotel was also affected by the situation. Because the area needed to make room for the Atlantic Wall defense system, they were forced to leave the seaside property. Fortunately, because Rika was raising 5 children, she was assigned a larger house elsewhere after leaving the hotel. And this was all thanks to a priest who wrote a recommendation letter to the housing agency for her. But one day while Rika was praying, the priest introduced her to a young resistance fighter named Kees. Knowing that Rika had many empty rooms in her new house, he hoped she would provide shelter for Dutch resistance members and Jewish refugees. Dutch tenants paid 45 guilders per month, while Jewish refugees paid 60. At first, Rika did not think too deeply about it. The rooms would remain empty otherwise, and because of her compassionate nature, she quickly agreed to shelter Jewish refugees. After all, they could pay slightly more, but because of this decision, unimaginable tragedy slowly began moving toward her family. One day, little Waldy peeked through a crack in the door and witnessed a group of Jewish people being taken away by German soldiers, including Uncle Sam, who was being beaten violently. The boy shouted desperately, but instead attracted several hostile children who began throwing stones at him. Unable to endure the humiliation, the boy rushed forward and fought back. Meanwhile, Rika and several Jewish refugees were upstairs packing belongings when they suddenly heard violent knocking at the front door. She quickly told the Jewish families to hide upstairs immediately. When Rika opened the door, she discovered that her son had been brought home by 2 officers. Before leaving, they warned that if he caused trouble again, even his young age would not save him from prison. Rika believed the matter was over, but just as the officers prepared to leave, noises suddenly came from upstairs.
Wat is dat?
Dat is mijn werkster.
The 2 officers exchanged glances with each other, clearly realizing the situation was not that simple, but they chose not to act immediately in order to avoid alerting anyone. The moment the officers left, Waldy rushed upstairs to investigate because he still had no idea his mother was secretly sheltering so many Jewish refugees. The family was unknowingly walking on the edge of disaster. Meanwhile, during work, Waldemar overheard his supervisor speaking with a German officer about upcoming executions of Jewish prisoners, with the number possibly reaching tens of thousands. The conversation instantly filled Waldemar with fear, worrying that the hidden refugees in his home might eventually destroy all of them. That night after returning home, he confessed his fears to Rika and honestly told her he wanted to take her and their son back to Suriname, but with German forces sealing the borders, nobody could escape anymore. Besides, Rika could not bear leaving her children behind, and no matter how much her husband begged, she refused to abandon the home they had struggled so hard to build. But neither of them realized that their family's fate was already approaching its end. Suddenly, the couple heard their son screaming outside. A large group of German soldiers had already stormed into the house, targeting the Jewish refugees hidden inside. The situation instantly became critical. The family tried desperately to understand what was happening upstairs, but helping refugees was also considered a serious crime. To make matters worse, even a German deserter had been hiding there as well. The entire group of refugees was captured at once, and Rika's family had now crossed a line they could never return from. Even if they survived, their lives would never be the same again. Soon afterward, everyone was taken to a German military facility to be interrogated one by one. At that moment, Rika secretly handed her son a ring, but a guard noticed the movement and demanded he reveal what he was hiding. Thankfully, the boy reacted quickly and pulled out a coin with his other hand, successfully distracting the greedy soldier and protecting his mother's wedding ring. Meanwhile, because little Waldy was still very young, the officers decided to release him immediately. Before he left, his mother urgently told him to seek help at his uncle's store. That heartbreaking goodbye would sadly become the final time they ever saw each other again. After leaving, the boy rushed back home and found official seals placed across the doors, forcing him to climb through a second-floor window instead. After gathering family photographs into a wooden box, he desperately ran toward his uncle's store. Meanwhile, Rika was dragged into an interrogation room and questioned about why she had been helping Jewish refugees. The woman attempted to avoid suspicion by claiming she simply operated a travel business.
Hou op met liegen! Waarom zaten ze in jouw huis?
Iedereen heeft recht op een dak boven zijn hoofd.
Not only that, the officer also asked whether she knew a resistance fighter named Kees. Deep down, Rika understood perfectly well that Kees had been the one who introduced her to this dangerous work in the first place, leading to such devastating consequences, but she refused to reveal the truth. fearing she would expose countless innocent people to persecution, yet her stubborn silence only guaranteed even more painful punishment for herself.
Ga je nog eens praten, hè? Stom wijf. We weten allemaal dat Kees Chardon, oftewel Paul Vermeer, geen braaf advocaatje was, maar een vuile pestkliek had om Joden te helpen. En jij was zijn rechterhand.
Even after everything had reached this point, Rika still refused to betray anyone behind the operation, so the officer came up with another cruel method and ordered soldiers to bring in her young son, preparing to torture him directly in front of his mother. After failing to obtain useful information from Rika, the Germans turned their attention toward Waldemar instead. At the same time, a group of SS officers arrived at the store searching for Waldy, demanding that he be handed over immediately, but his uncle firmly denied knowing anything. Since they did not believe him, the soldiers searched every corner of the store inside and out. Meanwhile, Waldy was hiding beneath wooden boards inside a hidden cellar while the SS officers stood directly above him. Thinking quickly, the uncle lied and claimed that his family would never shelter black people. That statement successfully distracted the officers' attention. It seemed that even prejudice itself ended up saving the boy's life. After completing another search and finding nothing, the SS officers finally left the area. The moment they were gone, the uncle rushed to open the hidden cellar and pulled Waldy out. It was obvious the location had already been exposed, meaning the family urgently needed to move him somewhere safer. Meanwhile, Waldemar was held underwater for nearly 10 minutes during interrogation, yet the officers still failed to force useful information out of him. Even the commanding officer could not believe someone possessed such terrifying endurance.
Je familie heeft je zoon op straat geschopt.
After hearing the threats against his son, Waldemar became deeply worried that the child might truly be abandoned by the family. But unknown to him, the uncle had already driven Waldy deep into the countryside and placed him with a farming family. Perhaps this was the best possible choice, allowing the boy to remain safe in a peaceful world far removed from the chaos of war. 3 days later, the family saw news about Rika in the newspaper for the crime of sheltering Jewish refugees. Both she and Waldemar had been sentenced to life imprisonment. Their true nightmare had finally begun. Rika was transported with other prisoners to Voot concentration camp, where she unexpectedly saw her husband already imprisoned there. Waldemar was still alive, finally easing the fear she had carried inside her heart. But neither of them realized that this unexpected reunion would also become their final goodbye forever. As time passed, the female prisoners were forced to manufacture machine parts every day. At first, life still carried traces of hope, until one day the sound of roaring trucks echoed from outside. Rika immediately realized something terrible was happening, and as expected, Waldemar was taken away with other prisoners, disappearing completely from Rika's world and being sent toward an even crueler hell. The moment the prisoners arrived at their destination, they were met with Jewish corpses scattered across the ground. But inside the new prison camp, Waldemar unexpectedly found a small opportunity to survive. Because he could speak 4 languages fluently, he was assigned by the officers to work in the mail room instead of performing brutal physical labor. That opportunity finally allowed him to send letters to Waldy.
Brief van mijn vader!
But Waldemar's wife was not nearly as fortunate. Rika was also transferred to another concentration camp filled with endless suffering and cries of despair. The heartbreaking scene awakened the compassion inside her, and she shared the little bread she carried with starving prisoners nearby. Yet Rika never imagined that Jewish prisoners who once sold bread for enormous fortunes would now fight desperately over a few crumbs of food, ignoring the guards beating them mercilessly. Perhaps the era when Jewish people once lived with dignity had truly vanished forever. And now, she herself no longer knew what future awaited her. On freezing rainy nights during winter, prisoners stood outside enduring endless punishment, slowly destroying even Rika's once unbreakable spirit. Her mind constantly drifted back to memories of happier days, memories that also took place during rainy seasons long ago. Perhaps she would never see her children or husband again for the rest of her life. At that moment, the only thing Rika could still do was pray for her husband somewhere far away. Meanwhile, although Waldemar no longer suffered from hunger and freezing cold in the other prison camp, the pain of missing his family was written all over his face, so he poured all of his remaining hope into letters sent to his son back home. 3 months later, World War II entered its final stage. After Adolf Hitler took his own life, German morale suffered a devastating collapse, but the prisoners soon faced a new nightmare. In order to prevent enemy forces from attacking the area, the Germans prepared to transfer both soldiers and prisoners elsewhere. However, while the prison ship passed through Bay of Lubeck, large numbers of British warplanes suddenly appeared above the sea. Waldemar and the other prisoners believed rescue had finally arrived, and they raised their hands while cheering wildly. But in the very next second, the aircraft launched a direct attack against the ship. A storm of bullets instantly rained down everywhere. Meanwhile, near the German coastline, two young boys dressed in military uniforms secretly watched everything unfold from the shore. Their appearance would unknowingly plant the seeds for an even more tragic ending. British warplanes continued bombing the prison ship while prisoners scattered in panic with nowhere to hide. At that moment, Waldemar noticed the shoreline close by and decided to leap into the freezing water in a desperate attempt to survive. Perhaps this was his only remaining chance. After the British planes finally left the sky, Waldemar fought his way out of the water, believing hope was finally within reach. Even though a rescue boat floated nearby, he refused to climb aboard with the other surviving prisoners. Instead, relying on the swimming abilities he had mastered since childhood, he tried to escape the chains of imprisonment completely through his own strength. Back in Suriname, he had once swum through rivers like a fish that could never stop moving freely through the water. Water had always been his closest companion, and he trusted it more than anything. No distance ever seemed impossible for his determination to overcome. But just as Waldemar neared the shore, the two armed boys spotted him. Danger arrived without warning. The moment Waldemar's prisoner uniform became visible above the water, one of the boys aimed a machine gun directly at him.
1, 2, 3.
Waldemar had escaped death in the sea, yet he could not escape the hatred already planted inside the hearts of children. In the spring of 1945, the war finally ended. Waldy received a letter from his uncle and said a final goodbye to the farming family who had cared for him before taking a train back to the city alone. There, he reunited with his sister and uncle and eventually went to live with his grandmother. Before leaving, the uncle pulled a small note from his pocket. It was a message his mother had thrown from the train before being taken to the concentration camp. The final memory Rika left behind. And with that, the film Sonny Boy came to an end. The movie was adapted from a novel by Enged van der Zigel and presents audiences with a story based on real events from World War II. As for Rika's final fate, the film itself does not fully explain it, but according to the ending text, Rika died during a dysentery outbreak inside Ravensbrück concentration camp. Historical records show that nearly 50,000 female prisoners lost their lives there, making it a true living nightmare. Waldy himself did not learn the real truth behind his parents' deaths until 60 years later in 2004. Waldemar attempts to explore the heavy subject of race, but even more importantly, it portrays real lives, real emotions, and the devastating consequences faced by people desperately struggling to survive. I'm a movie lover, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.